Hi, everyone. Welcome. Nice to see your smiling faces. My name is Jeffrey Benson. I'm the current president of the California Choral Directors Association, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our third in our weekly webinar series. We're doing a chat with some fantastic composers, three of who have driven all the way in from their homes in California, and one has flown in from Kansas City. We're so happy to have Dr. Andrea Ramsey here from her home in Kansas City, longtime conductor and teacher, working with middle school and high school and then college, but now full-time composer. And of course, David Montoya, who is at La Habra High School down in Southern California and is also our California R&R chair for composition, choral composition. Dr. Zenaida Robles, from Harvard Westlake School in Southern California, and an amazing composer. She was just our commissioned composer for our all-state chorus this year. And Dr. Ron Kean, professor emeritus from Bakersfield College. Thank you all so much for being here. And before we start, I just want to give a shout out to Trish Adams, who is the executive administrator for CODA, the Orchestra Directors Association, the Band Directors Association of California, and the California Music Educators Association, who is organizing all of these Zooms for us so that we don't have to stress about it as much. Thank you, Trish. We love you. I'm going to start just by turning it over to our panel, just checking in. How are you doing in this crazy, crazy time, sort of adjusting? I won't call it the new normal because it's nothing about this is normal. So the new world that we're living in as musicians and artists, most of you are still teaching as well. But how are you adjusting to this, and how are you finding your inspiration right now? How about David? You want to get us started?
Sure. Well, I think I'm adjusting pretty well. I was feeling, I've been trying to be as organized as I can with my students at school, but that is what it is, and we're working towards things, and they're learning things, and I'm giving opportunities for students to engage. What I'm also finding is without the driving time and staying home and being home all that time, there's time for my own creative explorations and my own studies and connecting with other composers. A lot of composers I've been working with online one-on-one, talking about their music and learning about their programs, different places around the country. It's been a nice experience for me.
How about you, Dr. Ramsey?
Yeah, it's been it's been the longest I've been home for a while. And, you know, it's wild because about 10 consecutive gigs canceled, and then you're sort of like, wow, we're home. And so in some ways it's been great. I had more time to work on this suffrage cantata that I'm working on. I've had more time to breathe and grow. I'm growing like herbs and tomatoes, and I'm trying to cook and all those kinds of things. But it's also been like a bit of a roller coaster. There have been some days where I feel super productive and I get a ton done and I feel really creatively engaged. And then there are other days where you just want to park it on the couch and watch Netflix and you feel distracted and like you've gone the whole day trying to do things and nothing's happening. And so that's just me being very real. But what I do find is that when I am working creatively, like there's a weird intensity to it now. And I don't know if David and Zenaida feel the same way, but it's a different feeling. Like you appreciate it more, and you also live in this place of I have to live in just the day, because there's that part of me that's like, I hope this is performed at some point. You know, you just there's that if you think too far down. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Ron, Dr. Kean?
Yeah, well, this has been unusual in that I've been teaching since I retired 7 years ago from choral music, world music every semester. Just one class, but this class decided not to. I mean, this semester I decided not to, and oh my goodness, I haven't had to do any of the things that everybody else is doing to try to make their classes work and survive and thrive with technology that I don't know how to do yet. So that part of it it's been a blessing. Much like Andrea, I've had a bunch of gigs canceled all at once. including a world premiere that was canceled the day before. So it's been, but they've all said that they've been postponed and not canceled. So we'll leave it at that. Been walking a lot. That's been my solace. As I'm trying to compose something anyway, I walk and walk and walk and walk. And after 45 minutes, something usually comes. And so I've been walking 12 to 14,000 steps a week. That's 5 or 6 miles, something like that. Just trying to keep sane. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's great. Speaking of sort of inspiration and what you do, whether in times of hardship like now or just in general, I think many of us are curious about where you turn for inspiration just throughout your life as a composer and as a creative artist. Zenaida, do you have certain sort of strategies and tricks for finding those moments of quiet and those moments of inspiration in general?
That's a really great question. I've always been the type of musician that vacillates between composing and conducting and singing and teaching and composing and conducting and singing. It's kind of like this, that's how I like, it's like one feeds the other, and to have a piece of that taken away has really kind of thrown me off balance. And so sort of like Andrea was saying, there's this intensity whenever I'm doing any of my creative work. And I'm finding that I'm really grateful that my projects that I, had been working on, the commissions and things, had passed. I had 2 commissions earlier, and I got them out, and they got performed before all of this happened. So right now, and nothing has come down the pike yet. So it's personal projects right now, which I'm really grateful for, because this is the season of teaching and singing with church work. So compositionally for me right now, I find that the music that is coming to me that I have to write is really personal music, and it's very intense. And so I have very intense periods of creativity, and then, but it's not sustainable because there's like intense periods of crashing and vegging, and I'm trying to, you guys need to pray for me because I'm trying not to eat all these chocolate almonds. I shouldn't even have them in here. And so it's stuff like that. That's like, when your system of self-care has been disrupted, how do you find new ways? Honestly, one thing that has been inspiring has just when I'm able to get out into nature, just outside, whether it's in your backyard or whatever. I'm the type of person that I do need sunlight, and it was really hard a few weeks ago when we had all that rain here in Southern California, and I felt like I was not able to be productive, and so, just trying to figure out how do I get through those periods. I think you just kind of go through them and trust that the sun's still there and it will come back out. And it's coming out today. And today, I feel this urge to get back to composing. New melodies are coming to my head, and I'm thinking about, a fragment that I kind of wanted to work on and put with another piece and something to develop. I hadn't been feeling that when the sun wasn't out. So, you got to have grace and, space to kind of go through and weather the storms as they come, I guess.
Amen. Yeah, Andrea, you said something about, those days, those periods where you're just sort of on the couch and can't get motivated. I was having that day yesterday, and I just had read this article about rebooting. Even if your day doesn't start until 3:30, it's still, you can get something done. What do you, Andrea, find to kind of get you back into that creative space?
I think that's awesome, and I would love to read that article. I've just let the day be. Like, when it happens, I just go, you know what? But I'm also not in a situation like you are, where you're still having to juggle academia right now or classes or whatever. Like, I have a bit more space because this is my world, is composing. And now that the travel is gone, which is sort of like what Zenaida said, like, I know the same thing, like, because that travel would feed the creativity a lot. So I've been taking walks as well. I thought it was really interesting that Ron was talking about writing while he walks. I don't know that I do that consciously, but I remember reading the poet Mary Oliver wrote all of her poetry while she walked. And so I think that's really interesting that that's what he's doing. But so I'm trying to find inspiration in nature. I'm trying to find it in reading. I'm trying, you know, I really think it's everywhere if we just keep our eyes open, but now we just don't get to see as much and do as much. So we have to look a little harder. So I think actually in like, I'm planting microgreens and herbs, and like there's something about that that's kind of inspiring. So nesting, you know,
Nice.
finding new ways. One of the things, and then I'll quit, but one of the things I think is the toughest for me is just realizing how much my sense of meaning and purpose was wrapped up in the work I was doing, and particularly with other singers elsewhere, and how when that's gone, it's been really interesting to sort of find new ways to find meaning or to feel like I'm making a difference somewhere.
I'm curious, John Tauberg told us a few years ago when he was the headliner at Echo about an email that he subscribes to of a poem a day. You know, so much of what we do as conductors and composers is interpret poetry that we're singing. And so I'm curious where you guys are going for your poetry now, and how you look for that poetry, and where you're, you know, getting inspired from that end. David, do you have something like that in your life where you're reading a new poem every day?
Not that I'm reading a new poem every day. I took the inspiration from a colleague of mine. He's a science teacher who said his goal was to read 50 books in 1 year. And so I said, okay, 50 books. I don't think I can get to 50, but maybe I can do 3 books a year. So, or three books a month, I'm sorry. So I started to do that 2 years ago. It was a New Year's resolution. And so I've maintained it. Sometimes they're very small books, and sometimes they're pretty major books, but I'll read through those and just keep myself reading with a goal of finishing things in the month. Some of those are poetry books. Some of those are, you know, science books, religion books, etc. But this year, and especially with the quarantine and the home time, I've been doing 4 and 5 books a month, which is kind of nice. So when I'm looking through those, I'm always keeping an eye out for something that would spark my musical brain to want to compose something. But I've also a good relationship with a poet in Los Angeles named Bill Wallace, who we've now collaborated on several projects. The last piece I wrote about a couple of months ago was a piece called A Wish, which I wrote with another inspiration of mine, and that's my students. And so I wrote it with students in mind. The text had to do with the teacher-student relationship. So working with a living poet is always great, and he's very humble. And if I say, you know, this kind of doesn't fit musically what I have in mind, he's like, go ahead, change it, do whatever you want with it, and then I'll show him anything that I wanted to do, and he's very flexible. So it becomes a true collaboration in creating a piece of art.
How about you, Ron?
Oh, thanks for asking. Well, a lot of it has depended recently on who's asking me to write something. And last summer, I was asked to write a piece at Cuesta College on their trip to Normandy for the 75th anniversary of the Allied invasion. So I went online, and I wanted to find something. After going through the great poets of our, you know, last 400 or 500 years, I said, no, I want something more specific. So I found something online by an English signal corpsman who survived D-Day on Juno Beach and wrote this magnificent poem telling the whole story. It took me about 3 weeks to a month to find it. And once I found it, it was bam. It's one of those. I'm writing on a commission now on about the Japanese internment to honor one of our conductors, as you know. And I found this magnificent poet, Japanese poet who was interned during World War II, 82 years old. And I said, can I use this poem of yours? He says, you certainly can, but if that doesn't suit your needs, let me know, I'll write you another one. So that's 2 of the most recent ones anyway.
I love that you all are talking about working with living poets as well as finding poetry that's been around for a long time. I think the collaborative part of this whole experience is what I think as conductors draws us to working with living composers. I know I had an amazing experience working with two of the four of you in collaboration and talking through the process. So what advice would you give conductors who maybe never commissioned composers before? I'll open this up to whoever wants to go first on this. But if I'm a conductor who's never commissioned, what are my first steps, and what advice would you give me?
Okay, I think I'll go. Don't be afraid to reach out to somebody whose music you really like. Composers like hearing from people. Sometimes we become very anonymous. In today's world, it's too easy to get a hold of somebody. And so if you're interested in somebody's style, you like their music, you've heard something that they've done, call them up, give them a call, send them an email, contact them through the publisher, whatever you have to do, because we love to hear from people. And so don't be afraid. And it might be within your budget. It might not be within your budget. A lot of composers will be very flexible with that. Some have their set rates, but it doesn't hurt to start up the conversation with somebody.
I just really appreciated the experience I've had with conductors who invite me to write things that are related to some aspect or some theme or some poem that they have passion about. The more a conductor gives, some indication of like where they're feeling. Not, it's one thing to say, I want a piece that has this, these instruments, for this type of choir, but I love engaging in the conversation around what the piece means and what the piece is going to do and what it's going to say and what is your dream for the piece. And so as much of that background depth that you can bring to the conversation about what you want to hear and what you want the piece to do for your singers or for the audience, that always is very life-giving to me as a composer. And I always find that I come up with something, it's a little easier to put together that something that's more organic, and it just seems to flow a little bit better when there's that germ of a intention, a real intention, a real passion, or whatever you can bring to the piece beyond just kind of the basic musical components.
Andrea or Ron?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think, sorry, like my cat just showed up. And I think that, I think I agree with, first of all, I love what David said about just reaching out, because even if it doesn't pan out, if you don't end up doing the commission, there's no composer who's going to be offended that you reached out and said, hey, I like your music. Can we explore this idea? And then what Zenaida said, I thought was really neat too. It's one of the first things that I do when I have a few questions that I ask somebody when they approach me about commissioning, and it's on my website or if they just email me. But one of them is, what do you want your singers to take from this? What do you hope to gain from this? What do you want your audience to get out of this experience? And especially if it's somebody I haven't worked with before. And then that gives me a sort of a frame of what they're going for. The one thing that I will say is a little bit, I'm always happy to receive suggestions for text. So anybody wants to say, hey, we love this, what do you think? But that's the one area that I'm a little bit picky about. And I will come back and say, if it doesn't resonate with me, I'll just be really honest and say, would you be open to other texts? Can we look at other ideas? And we'll go back and forth until we find something that works. Or if they'll say, no, this is really important to us and we have to have this text. And then I will say, that's wonderful. And I'm sure you'll find another composer who's open to setting it. But I don't think, I think every composer is a little bit different, in how they handle it. But I would say if you're interested in doing it, the other piece I would say is really important is just to get everything in writing that you want at the outset and through the process, so that you don't get to the end and have big surprises. And don't be afraid to say, no, I really want to specify the ranges. Is that okay? Or I really, especially if you're doing a piece for middle school or something where that really is critical. So all those details, I think, are important in order to make sure that it's successful.
I would agree with the both of you so far. Just don't be afraid to reach out. And, any door that's not knocked on is never going to open. So yeah, give it a shot. And then once you get things going, I mean, eventually the money's going to be involved, but like Andrea said, get it in writing. And what are your performance forces? Who are your soloists? Is there a theme? I love to write on a theme. This last commission that I didn't hear, I was asked to write an opening for the concert based on the cycle of life by the Sacramento Master Singers. And I kept looking for text, kept looking, and finally my daughter says, "Dad, write one," which I've never done. So I did. And so it ended up to be very personal. I'm very proud of it. I may not write anything else ever in my life, but it worked this time because my first grandchild was recently born and I had an inspiration.
Yeah, that's
Congratulations, Ron.
Thank you.
Can I add something to the idea of if you're I was reading the Dale Trumbore book, Staying Composed. If you haven't read this book, it's a fantastic book, especially for a young composer starting out. But I got a lot out of it myself. And one of the things she talked about was making sure if you're going to write something for somebody that there is a contract. Make sure that both parties agree to everything, including what the fee is going to be, when it's going to be performed, what happens if it doesn't get performed, will you still be paid, things like that of that nature. Are they going to perform whatever you write? Are they looking for a specific thing? So as Andrea was saying, the details, what are your forces, etc. Put that all into contract, even if it's between friends and it's a very informal contract, something should be in writing so that feelings don't get hurt and you don't put in all this work with expectations and then nothing happens.
That's great advice. Thank you all. Are you all more involved in commissions these days, or do you still write music just for yourself and don't have it tied to a choir that will do the premiere specifically? Andrea?
Yeah, so I would say yes, but the way I would say it is that while I guess in the last 2 years, maybe there's one piece that I wrote that wasn't commissioned, but I'm still writing the things that I love because I'm steering the commissioners toward things that I love. And sometimes, and occasionally there is something where they're like, what do you think about this? Or, and maybe it's not the thing I'm most passionate about, but I still like it. And I still think, oh yeah, I can make something lovely out of this. Or there'll be or sometimes I'll just share ideas and then people like the Twain quotes, right? That was just a random idea and Jeffrey said, let's do it. And so we did, but yeah, so I mean, I still, for myself, sometimes, every so often I want to do one just as a gift to someone or or maybe there's something that I'm itching to do, but even the ones that are commissioned, like, I don't feel like I do a good job unless I'm passionate about it. So I don't usually set up a project unless I'm going to feel that way toward it.
I would say, I would just add on a thought, as I said before, I kind of go back and forth between composing and singing and teaching and conducting. And for that reason, I don't do very many commissions. I've turned down quite a few for practical reasons. A lot of times it's that I don't have time, but I feel like because of the way that I work, there needs to be, in order for me, I want to feel like I'm producing my best work, and because I don't always feel like I'm able to get into the compositional, mindset like I would like to on a regular basis. I like to take things that really, really speak to me right away. So I do a lot of composing for myself. A lot of times it's like, this is what has come out of me, and when I get approached, a lot of times I'm looking for the project that is in alignment with, or that kind of speaks to something that has already kind of come out of me a little bit, so I can say, oh, this looks like it will be a beautiful fit because my heart's already in this, and if this is something that can speak to them as well. So that's just a kind of a different way of approaching it. I guess I'm a little bit more kind of conservative with my projects. I don't do very many of them, but when I do them, it's like all my heart and soul goes into it.
And I'll echo that. Being a high school teacher and a full-time husband and dad, finding the time to compose the project has to be just right.
Yeah.
But to take too many commissions would make it difficult to really be true to yourself, I think. So if something comes up and I want to write something for myself because I'm just itching to do it, or if somebody asks me to write something, usually they give me the choice of texts. So I can put all of myself into that project. But then I know there's gonna be late nights, there's gonna be squeezing in time to do the writing, squeezing in time to make the project sing. And so it's tough juggling that with a full-time schedule otherwise.
Alyssa, Ani had asked on the chat here, what's your optimum amount of time? Like, what's the window of time if one of us as a conductor and teacher are going to commission you? How much lead time do you usually want? Some of you probably have better times of year than others. And then also, what if we were inviting you not only to write the piece, but we also wanted you to come out and conduct the premiere of it? What would be the optimum window of time? On your thinking.
Let's say it depends. If you know you're going to plan this for the next school year, because I always think myself in school years. So if you're going to do that, then as early as you can the previous year to let us know that that's what you would like. Some composers, I think myself included, would prefer not to conduct it, but to listen to it and to sit in the audience. That's how I usually feel. I mean, I will conduct it if they would prefer, but I like sitting back and enjoying the performance myself. So anywhere from 6 months to a year ahead of time is I think, fair.
Same with me. Usually I get them 6 months to a year out, but my goodness, Jeffrey, I've worked with you and Lou and Jonathan Tallberg recently and Jennifer Guerra. I'm not going to conduct your choirs. You guys are brilliant.
Well, we still would love to have you conduct our choirs, Ron, but all four of you are fantastic conductors as well as composers, which is what's sort of really thrilling about it.
Thank you.
I'm going to piggyback on that, though, on what Ron said, though, because I think very often I'll steal ideas from conductors, the things that they do with my piece, because we're so close to it. I mean, I'll do a good job, and sometimes there are people that conduct a piece, and I think, oh, I wish I was in that somehow. And but so many more times, a conductor that is great will bring things out of it that I didn't know were there before, and that's really lovely.
Yeah, I would just echo. Honestly, I really don't like conducting my own pieces. Because I'm too close to it. That's just me. But my colleagues have said, you feel you're working with extraordinary people that are brilliant conductors. Oftentimes in my case, they're like my, either my mentors or, my good friends or people that I look up to and I'm trying to steal stuff from, right? But I recall a time where I was doing a concert with a colleague, a fellow conductor composer, and we were conducting each other's works, and some of us were kind of swapping and kind of deciding what we wanted to conduct, and I was conducting one of my compositions with the choir, and it was okay. And then there came I forget what the circumstance was, but I for some reason needed to go out and listen, or something. And then my colleague conducted it, and I was like, oh my God, like I don't want to get in the way of that. I need to get out of the way, because I just honestly felt like the choir was giving something different and something bigger, and I couldn't figure out what I was showing in my gesture that was in the way of that sound, and I wouldn't have known that was possible if my colleague hadn't actually conducted it. So I don't know what that says, except to say that my colleagues often just can bring some tone to it that's missing. Maybe it's that it needs another voice other than my own in order for it to sparkle or something.
And if you think about it, if you've gone and listened to you know, Copeland conducts Copeland, or Britain conducts Britain, or those are not the best recordings of those works. Like, and they're not. I just saw that somebody in the chat. Well, can I respond to that? Is that okay? That they said about how, like, they were asking about if we like to provide feedback or come and work with a video conference. And that part I love, because I think there's great discussions to be had, and there may be a few things that there is an idea that's not coming across that you want to do that. But when it comes to actually hearing the piece, and especially if it's a premiere, I would much rather be able to experience it than be in charge of it.
Yeah.
Because then you feel super responsible, and if you screw it up, it's all you. And and I'm much more forgiving, actually, of another conductor messing something up than I would be of myself.
Yeah. And I think you're listening different. At least I'm listening differently when I'm out there as opposed to when I'm conducting it, especially a new piece.
So maybe all of us conductors will conduct the world premiere of all your pieces, and then we'll bring you out to conduct the second performance.
Sure.
Dress rehearsal.
That's right. Zenaida mentioned something about her mentors, and I'm curious. And then Andrea mentioned something about sort of, you know, Britain conducting Britain and Copeland conducting Copeland. I'm curious. Would you all talk maybe a little bit about, going back to the inspiration question? Who are your mentors? Who has inspired you compositionally, specifically, as your actual teachers and mentors, but also other composers who have inspired you? Maybe they were never your official teacher, but you know, you just love listening to their music and it's taught you something.
God, there's so many. Oh my gosh! But it's funny, depending on where I am in my life, like different voices kind of come out of my music. Like I can listen to something, like when I was studying piano when I was younger, I loved Aram Khachaturian, and I hear, like, sometimes in my accompaniments, like I like fiery, like, you know, toccata, like piano parts. So sometimes and I'm listening to that the other day. I was listening to something that I composed, and I was like, oh my God, there's Khachaturian in that, you know, or you know, I mean, it's hard not to be infected by Lordson, you know, like you know, especially having studied with him a little bit at USC. I think the some of the color and some of the weight, you know, I like to draw from that, and I just draw this inspiration. And then there are other pieces that I want to honor, like a conductor from, like my arrangement of Lift Every Voice and Sing is designed to honor another arranger of Lift Every Voice and Sing, and I, you know, on purpose. And I want that to be heard. And I always wonder if you know, what you hear in other composers' music of other composers, because I think that that's fascinating and beautiful. Actually, I think that there's it's almost like you can hear a lineage from composer to composer to composer to composer, and it's a really special thing. I hope one day something I might write might inspire someone else. But yeah, there's so many people. I just also have to throw out Ravel and Debussy. Just don't ever go away from me. So I'm always looking to them. That's just where I am.
How about you, David?
Well, if we're talking about composers that I gravitate towards, it usually starts and ends with J.S. Bach. I will swim in that ocean all day long, every day if I can. And but also I've had a love since college for the works of Gustav Mahler, his orchestration, his color, his structure. I just love that music. Just speaks to me so much. So those are composers that I love in general. The 20th century composers like, say, Charles Ives or Duraflé, of course. My mentors now, who I still go to on a regular basis, one is named George Hoistenstam, who we've named the Echo competition after. He's 92 right now, and he is a retired composer, incredibly inspirational, brilliant man, and he funds our competition. And so I go to him regularly for studies in counterpoint and studies in, or just sitting down and listening to music together. It's a wonderful experience. He was actually my college music professor, and 20 years after college, we found each other again, and we started up another friendship and relationship to this day. My other mentor is W.A. Matthew, author of Harmonic Experience. Some of you have that book. Nod if you have that book. The big, giant, wonderful harmony text. And he's been my teacher for well over 20 years, and I go to him. One of the great things about the quarantine is that I've been able to start up my lessons with him again. So we're studying harmony, we're studying, figured bass, we're studying counterpoint, we're getting deep into it, to going back to the fundamentals that only inform my composition, and amazingly inspirational to me.
How about you, Andrea?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how to answer this. Because I feel like when I was an undergrad student and even a senior in high school, like those years I feel like were really formative listening years. And if I had to say like who I was listening to the most then, I was like a complete Sondheim nerd. I was absorbing like every musical that I could of his stuff, and I was listening a lot to Z. Randall Stroop and Renee Clausen and Lauritsen, and I'm a sucker for melody, and I know that like sometimes that I don't know. There's so much more than melody, but I just I don't know. I love it and I want it to be there, and so. But right now I would say like, I studied in my undergrad for a few semesters. I studied applied composition with one of our percussion instructors who is a composer. But beyond that, I mean, I really am a hack at this, but I've so loved since moving to Kansas City, like getting together with Kurt Connect, who composes here and whose mind is just totally like, he's a theory god, and I am like so right-brained intuitive, and when we get together to talk through things, because he'll bring something he's working on and I'll bring something I'm working on, and we'll talk through it, and he'll say, have you looked at this voicing, or have you thought about contrary motion here, or have you and he'll slice it and dice it from sort of the left brain side, and then he'll show me his piece and I'll be like, it just feels like it feels like it needs to be longer here. Like, why does it go like all of a sudden it's big and this? I mean, I just speak right brain language, and I always tell him like, I feel like you're getting cheated out of this, and he goes, no, we're saying the same thing. It's just different vocabulary, and so we kind of make each other's pieces stronger through that process, which is neat.
That's great. And how about you, Ron?
Oh, thanks for asking. As a community college student, my music theory teacher thought I might have my composition, I might be a composer one day, which really surprised me. And so he recommended that I go to study with a friend of his. And I did every other Wednesday for 2 years. His name was Bruce Broughton. And he's now won 10 Emmy Awards for his music. He wrote the music to Silverado and a whole bunch of wonderful, wonderful movies. And what I learned from him was just phenomenal. And he would help me with the composition, or what am I doing in theory he says, okay, write this and this and this for your next assignment. In the meantime, he was playing Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto for this symphony in San Fernando Valley. He says, Ron, I need a page turner. So I was exposed to all this incredible music very, very early on. And Brahms is my guy, I have to say. I've always been Brahms. Yeah. And things that changed my mind about composing and other mentors was 10 years off and on studying West African drumming with a master drummer. That's affected all of my writing. There's no question about it. My dear friend, Don Vinegar, we were roommates on a choir tour for 30 days, once with the USC Chamber Singers. And what I learned from him when he developed his ideas about just intonation and resonance and balance as a result, revolutionized the way I wrote and changed the sound of my choirs instantaneously. But in terms of, one of the questions before, or prep questions was, how do you think about, where does your idea come from to begin with? And I met Eric Whitaker as a 21-year-old at Cal State Long Beach for the first ever student ACDA conference for Western Division. We became instant friends, and 7 or 8, maybe 10 years later, we co-conducted an honor choir together. And I said, I'm stuck on this piece of music, the Gloria from my American Mass. And he sat down with me and he says, I will do the same thing that my teacher did for me, John Corleano. I will never suggest one thing to you once you start writing a piece, but I can get you started. And he took out a blank sheet of paper and he says, okay, Gloria, this is going to start big, small. I said, oh, it has to start, you know, like a fanfare or something like that. And where does it go from there? And we're just making little doodles on the sheet of paper. And well, maybe on some counterpoint here, or you want melody, just melody here and thin it out, whatever. How many verses are there? Is each verse going to be a little different? How many sections are there? Where do you want to end up? Pretty soon, I had this all sketched out on a piece of paper without writing a note. And that blew my mind. That was 45 minutes just before we went out to dinner one night. That changed my life right there.
You know, I just, Ron, I love that story so much. It reminds me, and you know, it's interesting. The last composition lesson I had was with Carolyn Brimmer at Cal State Long Beach. And as you know, she passed away. And I hadn't really studied a lot of composition. I did do some choral arranging, and I did a semester's worth of composition at USC with Morton Lordson. But I felt like, you know, a lot of what I was doing there was just kind of tightening up stuff that I had done before, and I started a couple of new pieces. Carolyn was so I was searching for someone to sort of help me, and she really took me under her wing. I only got a chance to work with her for maybe a few months, and her passing was really, really difficult for me. I would not have gotten the commissions I've gotten recently, or even be considering myself a composer. I didn't think I was going to be composing anything until I worked with her. And she convinced me that I had enough skill and enough material to put something out there that people might be interested in doing, and to sit down and do the work. Like, that's the thing. A lot of my experience had been, just I'll improvise. One of my techniques is I'll improvise something, I'll record it, listen back to it, and then create a piece out of it. I love to work that way. Carolyn taught me about process and how to sit down and really work through something and how to come back and work to it again. And I will just never, ever forget that. And I finished my I finished my revisions of my Magnificat for chorus and organ. And then I finished it for her. Like, that was the piece we were working on, and I finally was going to have it performed, and I was so excited to share it with her, and I never got to share with her the final product, which was it was such a bummer, obviously. But I think about that often, and how I don't even think I'd be talking to you today if it hadn't been for that one person. It's kind of, I feel strange having not remembered that. But there are so many people that come in and out of your life, and even if they're with you for a brief moment, can have such an incredible impact on you. It's important to have opportunities to remember that.
Well, and thank you, Zenaida. You said something earlier that was like you hoped that you could have an impact on someone, with your music at some point in your life, as much as others' music has impacted you. And I think that Carolyn and all of us are proud to have you in our great state as one of our amazing composers. And you've all four had an impact, and your music has, not just your music, your humanity, but even more specifically, your music has impacted all of us. I mean, it's a testament to your unbelievable talent and gifts that you provide all of us as conductors and teachers for our singers, our church musicians, our students, our community members. So thank you all. And I know Carolyn would be proud of that piece, I'm sure. We have about 15 minutes left, and I do have one final question that I'll ask in a little bit, but I wanted to open it up to a few questions. You have two options. We've just for safety's sake, as if you've not been on our webinars, we just don't want to have Zoom bombers, so we've forced mute on all of you, and only hosts can unmute you. So two options. You can either type your question in the chat, and I can read it, as we've done a few already, or if you click on the participants button at the bottom of the Zoom screen, there's a way to raise your hand under the participants thing, which is different from the like high five emoji that goes away, but there's a hand raise, and then I can find you more easily and unmute you. While we're looking at that, Andrea sort of answered the first part of Johnny Urban's question about coming in to sort of provide feedback. I'm assuming you would all be willing to, even if you're not going to guest conduct the choir, now would you be willing to come in and Zoom chat with choirs, and or once we get back to reality, can we fly you in or drive you in and have you come in and work with our choirs even just for a rehearsal period?
Yeah.
Amen. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And a quick sort of side question too that Mary Hamilton asked about, Chorus America has done some of the big joint commissions where, you know, more than one choir, you know, maybe up to 10 choirs can be, so that it's more affordable. I think, Andrea, you're working on the suffrage cantata right now, and I think that's a consortium, right? That's multiple choirs. How do you all feel about the choirs pooling their funds for a big joint commission like that?
That's incredible. What's it like for you, Andrea?
No, this is the first time actually, well, I shouldn't say that. I did the Chorus America consortium once. This is the first time though that I've done a consortium like apart from, and really Matt Workman at National Concerts has organized this, which has been amazing because he and Iris both said, we're going to take that part off your plate. You just worry about the piece, we'll get the people. And I think it's fantastic because it went beyond my dreams in terms of participation, and then it also like helps secure the funding that otherwise we would have been worried about, are these grants going to come through? Are we going to be able to pull this off? And it's happening. And so that's thrilling. So yeah, I think it's brilliant.
Andrea, as an aside, will you tell, maybe not everybody knows about the women's suffrage cantata that you're writing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, this is a big leap for me. So it's 30 minutes, SSAA chorus with string quartet, piano, percussion, well, optional percussion, narration, and soloists, taking the journey from 1848, the first National Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, to the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. So 72 years of history, but sort of leaping around through these moments of, how did Iris say it? We wanted to shoot through the lens of that quote, well-behaved women rarely make history. So we're looking at the biggest troublemakers along the path.
Yeah.
And what are the plans for that, Andrea, now that the actual live premiere won't happen? At least
well,
now.
actually, none of the premieres have been canceled yet because this year is the 100th anniversary of the passage. Next year is the 100th anniversary of ratification. Now, I do think probably it may be, I don't know yet. We'll see if they go through. A lot of this hinges on things that we can't control, right? So, but the first premiere was scheduled to be happening in October, and then throughout the fall and in through April, and then I think after June or July, sometime in the summer, probably it will be available to other people. Summer of 2021, that is. Yeah.
Fantastic. Lena Shanakis, hi Lena. Lena asks, if a composer would like to attend the premiere, whose financial responsibility is it? Is that the financial responsibility of the composer or the organization that did the commission?
Say it depends on the distance, and it depends on what you specify in the contract ahead of time. If a composer can make it out there, I think they will. If you can offer them, a stipend in order to take care of that, then that would be greatly appreciated. Sometimes, lodging could be staying with the conductor, or someone else who has a nice accommodations to offer, that kind of thing. I mean, we'll do what we can to make it work. At least that's how I feel. And so it just needs to be decided on in advance.
Well, Jeffrey and Jonathan know where I'm coming from. And I see Julie and Mike there. I will show up for wine.
Yeah, I just had Ron came in on his dime, but he stayed in my guest bedroom, and I just provided a good meal and some good wine. So actually, he brought the good wine too. So we were set. Nina has her hand raised, so I'm going to unmute Nina.
Hi, thank you so much. I have a question, especially regarding to what Zenaida was saying. I think I came from a very similar situation where I was a vocalist, and one of my professors said, "Hey, you should be a composer," or kind of like Ron was saying. What's your advice for beginning composers? How to get to a spot where you would actually be commissioned to write pieces for choirs?
That's a great question. I think that the commissioning is for me, it's been, about, I feel like I reached this point because I kept trying to, align myself and have conversations and relationships with conductors. Like that's the thing is knowing conductors and, knowing what conductors are trying to do, knowing what they're trying to say through their work, and at every level also. I also work in church music, and so just making those connections were important, and being as broad in terms of your connections as possible. So like, working, having relationships with churches, having relationships with, like the group Tonality in Southern California, which is a kind of more of a social justice oriented group. That I was commissioned by high school chorus in Pennsylvania earlier this year, who learned about my music from something they heard Tonality doing because they wanted to work on that type of music, So just that's why I feel like for me it's been more about the purpose behind the music and like making sure that I have a connection with a person, that a relationship that's behind the music making, because those relationships radiate out into the world, and then that's how I feel like you get seen as someone whose voice might have something really relevant to say compositionally. That's where we want to get to, right? I hope that answers your question.
And sort of along the same lines, Hugh had asked about, if you are a developing composer, if I want my work critiqued and I've never had a composition teacher maybe, where would you suggest sending them?
I don't know if I'm the best person. I feel like I get the best critiques, again, from my conductor friends and from my colleagues, like just honestly, because a lot of the critique, without being too technical about it, the form or the harmony or, how the piece is constructed, a lot of the feedback that I get a lot of times that is the best for how to construct a piece has to do with like length or with texture or with weight or with, not usually voicing so much because I have a pretty good idea of vocal ranges and that sort of thing. But sometimes if I'm trying to write for organ, for example, go to an organist, like just whoever, whatever the piece is written for, having that connection with a composer or with a conductor that you might potentially want to do it, what do you think of this? Honestly, I've done that several times before I even, was commissioned or, was able to profit off of any of the work that I did. There were many years of just asking people to listen to what I had written and give me that feedback. And I just think that that's invaluable. That never ends. I'm constantly asking for feedback. But from the people that I know care about me, and will be open to having a dialogue, and have some ability to converse about musical things. So just start with friends, but the most helpful to me have been people for whom I would dream of them doing my piece. Right, those are the people I want the feedback from.
say you want to find, you do want to find somebody, because every composer, even if they're, well, every composer is going to have something to offer you as a young composer, even if they're not terribly experienced. Maybe they have a lot of experience. Maybe they just have a little bit more than you. They're going to offer another perspective in looking at your piece. And it's good to have another perspective. You should be humble about your piece and be able to have them critique it as much as it needs to be. And you may not agree with their critiques of what you're doing, and you may find some of it useful and some of it not useful, but it is incredibly useful to have another pair of eyes and ears on your music. But finding a master teacher, if you want to get really serious about composition, I think is an invaluable thing. Somebody said earlier about the lineage. I think it was Zenaida was talking about that. And the lineage is important. My teacher goes back to his teachers and to their teachers all the way back to Nadia Boulanger. And it's kind of exciting to be part of that lineage and to know that I can help pass on some of that wisdom, even however small, to the next generation.
Yeah, just one more quick comment, about that, what David is saying, that finding that master teacher. I have no doubt that for me, that was Carolyn. That was going to be Carolyn. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. It took me so long to find her. And so when you find that person, not just someone that you can just bounce off ideas off of, but if you find someone that really, is taking you under their wing, like that's a really special relationship and one that's worth pursuing. And how did I find? I decided to intentionally search, and I went around thinking of the universities and the colleges and schools and individuals that I knew that I might have some kind of connection with. And I reached out to several different people, and she was the one that connected with. So there was an intentionality about reaching out to folks that might be able to help, and just finding that person that you connect with. That's a really worthwhile search to find that master teacher that can take you under their wing. I would give anything if I had Carolyn back.
I would like to suggest for a young composer, don't worry about commissions. Get your works heard by a choir, period. Because there's so much to be learned, and I have never released a work without hearing it. And a few years ago, I wrote this piece called The Rose That Bare Jesu, and I couldn't wait for the choir that had commissioned it. So I got 12 of my friends here in Bakersfield together and a fine pianist. And as I listened to it, I go, oh, that works. And what the hell was I thinking with that? Change it on the spot. And to me, that's invaluable, is to try to just listen to what you did. And sometimes when singers do it, it's different than what you heard in your head.
Before we are out of time, any just sort of last words of inspiration or wisdom to those of us who just are we're having that day maybe today or this week of being frustrated with quarantine right now. We're all having those good days and bad days. Any final words of inspiration from our fabulous panelists?
Can I just throw out the idea that I think there are a lot more composers in the world than we actually know, than actually compose. I run into choir teachers all the time who say, I've always thought about writing, but I haven't. And so I just feel like, I don't know, everybody has different situations. Not every situation is the same in this. Some of you are managing multiple children and trying to school them while you're trying to teach your own classes and all of this. But if you find yourself in a position with more space, and that's something that you've always thought about, do it. And don't overthink it, and don't be so quick to evaluate it and decide if this is good or if this is bad. Composing is it's like playing with Play-Doh, but you're using music. If you don't like the shape you make, you smush it out and you start again. And you keep playing until you find something that you like. But I just feel like we have a lot more creatives. We have tons of composers, but I'm constantly running into people who have this sort of secret dream, or maybe they're closet composers. And so this might be a season you could give it a go.
Come out of the closet, everybody.
It's not as mystifying as you might think. And I get surprised when I hear people just saying, no, I could never compose. You sure you can. You're a smart musician. You're a trained musician. try put some on the paper and see what happens. And like Ron says, get oral experience of that music and see where it goes.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank our amazing panelists today. I really appreciate you volunteering your time to be with us for our webinar. And I want to invite all of you who joined us to join us again next week. We have Anthony Arnold, Bay Area teacher, brilliant teacher and musician, giving his pentatonic palooza. All kinds of great activities that will work really well online to do pentatonic and sight singing and things like that. And so join us next week if you can, and then we'll be back with another panel the week after that. Zenaida, David, Andrea, Ron, thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a fantastic week.
Thank you.
And you as well. Be safe, be well.
Bye.